My grandson stood in the kitchen of my own house, holding a beer I'd paid for, and told me to my face that I should skip his college graduation because the sight of me would, and these are his exact words, make my friends think I come from trash. I set down the coffee mug I'd been washing. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded once, the way I used to nod at a foreman when he handed me a clipboard with bad news on it, and I went back to scrubbing the cup. 3 days later, when he walked across that stage in a borrowed cap and gown, he was going to find out exactly what kind of trash had been keeping the lights on in his life for 22 years. My name is Wendell Pruitt. I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I drove a service truck for the city of Akron, Ohio, fixing water mains in winters cold enough to freeze the marrow in your bones. My knuckles are crooked from 3 brakes I never had set right. My boots have steel toes and a layer of dried clay that hasn't fully come off since 1998. If you saw me at the gas station, you'd peg me for a man living on a pension and a prayer, maybe with a coupon book in his glove compartment. You'd be wrong by about $46 million. I sold Pruitt Underground Services to a private equity outfit in Cleveland 11 years ago. The papers were signed in a conference room that smelled like new leather, and I walked out with a wire transfer that would have bought every house on my street twice over. I never told anyone, not my sister in Tampa, not my poker buddies down at the VFW, and not my grandson Beckett, who I raised from the time he was 6 years old. His mother, my daughter Renata, died when he was 5. Drunk driver on I-77 coming home from a double shift, his father had vanished long before that, the way some men do, the way you stop looking for. So I took him in. I was 62. I should have been thinking about retirement and wally fishing on Lake Erie. Instead, I was warming up SpaghettiOs at 10 o'clock at night for a kid who wouldn't sleep without the hallway light on. I never bought a flashier truck. I never moved out of the brown ranch house on Whitsett Street. I drove the same '04 Silverado, kept wearing the same Carhartt jackets I had when I was working, and I funneled my money quietly. I paid off the mortgage on the house. I put $40,000 into a 529 plan for Beckett before he was even out of grade school. I bought a small commercial building downtown that I rented to a dental clinic. The rest of it sat with a money manager in Columbus who called me twice a year and called me sir, even though I told him not to. I did all of that for one reason. I wanted my grandson to grow up the way Renata had grown up, knowing the price of a gallon of milk, understanding that a person earns what they have. I'd seen what happens to kids who get told from age 3 that they're special, and I wanted no part of that. Somewhere along the way, the lesson didn't take. It started in high school. Beckett got into St. Bartholomew Prep on a partial scholarship he didn't know I was supplementing. He came home one afternoon and asked, in a tone that already had a sneer baked into it, why we couldn't get a normal car. I told him the Silverado ran like a top and was paid for. He said his friend Crispin's mom drove a Range Rover. I said, good for Crispin's mom. That was the first crack. By college, the cracks had become fissures. He went to Hartfield University, a private school an hour outside Columbus, on what he believed was a combination of his merit aid and federal loans. He didn't know the loans had been quietly paid off the same week he signed them. He didn't know I'd written a check for the difference each semester. He thought he was self-made. I let him think that. I thought it would build character. What it built was contempt. The first time he brought a girlfriend home, a thin, sharp girl named Ainsley with a voice like a wine glass, he asked if I would mind eating dinner in the kitchen instead of the dining room, so they could have privacy. In my house, the house his bedroom was in. I ate a sandwich standing over the sink, and I told myself he was nervous. He was young, he wanted to impress her. I made every excuse a man can make for a child he loves. The kitchen scene happened the Wednesday before graduation. He'd come home for the long weekend, supposedly, to help me clean out the garage. He'd been there 2 hours and hadn't lifted anything. He was leaning against the counter, scrolling on a phone I'd bought him. And I asked him what time the ceremony started Saturday so I could make sure to be there early for parking. He didn't look up from the phone. Yeah, about that, Pop. That was when he told me. He said his friends at Hartfield didn't know about me. He said when they asked about his family, he just said he was raised by relatives, kept it vague. He said his roommate's father was a partner at a law firm in Chicago, and his girlfriend's parents owned a vineyard in Sonoma, and that the optics of having a guy in a flannel shirt show up to his graduation would, quote, set him back socially for years. Those were the words he used, set him back socially, like I was a market downturn. I stood there with my hands in soapy water and listened to my grandson explain to me, kindly, the way you'd explain a complicated thing to a child, that the most important day of his life would go better without me in it. He said it would be better for both of us if I just sent the graduation gift and skipped the awkwardness. The graduation gift. Right. That was the part where he reminded me he was expecting a check. He'd already told me, 2 months earlier, that the gift he wanted was the down payment on a condo in a neighborhood in Chicago called Lincoln Park, $85,000. He needed it before the end of the month because he and Ainsley had already been touring units. He'd told me this not as a request, but as a logistical update. So let me get this straight, I said, and my voice was very quiet. You don't want me at the ceremony. But you do want $85,000 for the condo. He finally looked up from the phone. He gave me a look I'd never seen on his face before, but I'd seen it plenty of places in my life. On contractors who tried to lowball me on copper pipe. On insurance adjusters who thought I didn't read the fine print. It was the look a person gives you when they've already decided you're a sucker and they're just waiting for you to catch up. Pop, come on, don't make this a thing. You know I love you, but Saturday isn't about you. It's about my future. And honestly, the money isn't really yours. It's Grandma and Mom's. You're just the one who held on to it. You should want to give it to me. I dried my hands on the towel that hung on the oven handle, the same towel that had been hanging there for I don't know how many years. I folded it carefully. I told him I needed to think about it, and I went out to the garage, and I sat in the cab of my Silverado in the dark for about 45 minutes and didn't move. I wasn't crying. I want to be clear about that. I was past crying. What I was doing was something I hadn't done in 11 years, since I sold the company. I was making a plan. I went back inside an hour later. He was eating leftover lasagna out of the pan, standing at the counter, scrolling. He didn't ask where I'd been. Beckett, I said, I'll handle it. He grinned. I knew you would, Pop. You're the best. He didn't ask which part I was handling. That night, after he went up to his old bedroom, I went into the spare room I used as an office. I pulled out a manila folder I kept in the bottom drawer of the desk, the one I labeled simply B. Inside was every single thing I'd ever done for him financially. Every check, every tuition payment, every car repair on the Honda I'd bought him senior year of high school, every credit card bill I'd quietly paid when he overspent. The 529. The supplemental scholarship payments I'd routed through the school. The medical bills from when he tore his ACL playing intramural soccer. There was even a receipt from when he was 9 and broke a window at the neighbor's house with a baseball. The total at the bottom of the page, which I'd updated every January for 14 years, was $341,000, not counting the $85,000 he was now asking for. I sat at that desk under a single lamp, and I called my attorney. His name is Hollis Tarbell, and he's been my lawyer since 1989. He's a year older than me and meaner than a wet badger. He answered on the second ring even though it was past 10 at night. That's the kind of relationship we have. Hollis, I said, I've got a job for you. 3 days, not a minute more. Talk to me, Wendell. I told him everything. The kitchen, the flannel comment, the condo, the look on Beckett's face. Hollis didn't interrupt once. When I was done, there was a long silence on the line, and then he said, You want the gentle version or the surgical version? Surgical, I said. Then we have work to do. The next morning at 6, while Beckett was still asleep upstairs, I drove out to the diner on Route 18 where I'd been getting coffee for 30 years. Same booth, same waitress, a woman named Doreen who calls everyone Han. She poured my cup before I even sat down. Rough one, Wendell? My grandson told me yesterday he doesn't want me at his graduation. Doreen set the pot down on the table. Why the hell not? He says I'd embarrass him. She stared at me for a long second. Then she stared at me for a long second. Then she said something that surprised me. Wendell, I've known you since Reagan was in office. The kid's the embarrassment, not you. I sat there with my coffee getting cold, and I thought about that. I'd spent 14 years convincing myself that the way Beckett was turning out was somehow my fault, that if I'd been firmer, or warmer, or richer, or poorer, he'd be different. But Doreen was right. At 22 years old, you own who you are. He'd had every chance, every example, and he'd looked at the man who raised him, the man who'd held his hand when his mother was lowered into the ground, and he decided I was a stain on his future. I drove from the diner to the bank. My banker is a woman named Priscilla, who runs the wealth management side at the Regional headquarters in Cleveland. I called her from the parking lot and told her I was on my way. She had the conference room ready by the time I got there. I sat down at a table that probably cost more than my truck, and I gave her 3 instructions. 1. Cancel the wire transfer that was scheduled to fund Beckett's condo down payment. It hadn't gone through yet because the closing was set for the following Wednesday. She did it in front of me. 2 clicks. Done. 2. Pull the joint account I'd set up with him when he turned 18, the one I'd kept seated at $15,000 for emergencies, and remove him as a signer. She handled that with 3 keystrokes. 3. The credit card I'd given him as an authorized user, the one he used for groceries and books, and I now suspected a great deal more. Cancel it. Effective immediately. If he tried to use it that afternoon at the gas pump, it would beep red. She asked me, gently, if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. From the bank, I drove to Hollis's office in downtown Akron. He had a paralegal named Janine waiting with 3 files already pulled. Hollis sat me down and walked me through what we were going to do. The Honda. Title was in my name, not Beckett's. I'd never transferred it. I could repossess it any time I wanted. We weren't going to do it dramatically. We were going to wait. The 529 plan, what was left of it after his last semester, had a remaining balance of about $11,000. I was the account owner. I could redirect it. We were going to redirect it that afternoon to a scholarship fund that'd been quietly funding for 10 years, the Renata Pruitt Memorial Trade Scholarship at Stark State Community College, which paid tuition for kids going into HVAC, plumbing, and electrical work. Kids who would actually do something useful with their hands. The condo down payment. Already canceled. But Hollis pointed out something I hadn't even thought of. The realtor in Chicago had been working under the assumption I was a co-signer on the mortgage. Beckett had told her so. He'd put me down on the application, without telling me. Hollis, I said. He forged my signature? We're going to find out. Janine got on the phone with the mortgage company within 20 minutes. By noon, we had it confirmed. The signature on the co-signer line was not mine. It was a clumsy approximation, the kind a kid does when he traces from a memory. Beckett had committed bank fraud, federally, to buy a condo with his girlfriend, on the assumption that I'd never look at the paperwork because I never had before. I sat in Hollis's office and felt something shift inside me that I'd been holding back for 14 years. It wasn't anger. Anger is a small word. It was the cold, settled thing a foundation feels when the building above it has finally decided which way it's going to fall. What do you want to do? Hollis asked. I told him. I didn't want him in jail. Jail was clean. Jail was 3 meals and a roof, just like a grown man, Garrison Ford once said in some story I'd read. What I wanted was for Beckett to walk across that stage on Saturday, accept his diploma, smile for the cameras, hug his girlfriend, look out into the audience for the family he told to stay home, and discover, at the precise moment he planned to begin his glorious adult life, that there was no condo, no car, no checking account, no credit, no co-signer, no safety net, and no grandfather. Then we'd talk about the forgery. Hollis smiled. I'll have everything ready by Friday night. Service can happen Saturday afternoon. He won't see it coming. I went home. Beckett was gone, off somewhere with friends. He'd left a note on the counter. Pop. Took the Honda. Back tonight. Love you. Love you. He'd written that in a hurry, with a pen that was running out of ink. I sat in my recliner that evening and I watched the news with the volume low. I thought about Renata, about what she'd say if she could see what her son had become. I think she would have grabbed him by the ear the way she used to grab me when I came home, grumpy from work. And she would have said the same thing she always said. You don't get to take it out on the people who love you. She was 31 when she died. She'd been older than her son is now by less than a decade. Friday night, Hollis came over with a thick envelope. Inside it were 3 documents. A detailed accounting of every dollar I'd ever spent on Beckett, totaling now $341,000, with the $85,000 condo line struck through in red, a revocation of the existing trust I'd named him as beneficiary of, along with a notarized declaration redirecting the assets to the scholarship fund, and the kicker, a copy of the forged mortgage application with the false signature highlighted, along with a notarized affidavit from me confirming I had never signed it. You sure about Saturday? Hollis asked. I'm sure. He's going to break Wendell. He already broke. He just doesn't know it yet. Saturday morning was clear and warm. The kind of late spring day in Ohio that makes you think the world might be a kinder place than it is. I got up at 5. I put on a charcoal suit I'd bought 12 years earlier for Renata's funeral and hadn't worn since. It still fit. I knotted a black tie. I looked in the mirror and saw a man I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the grandfather. Not the retired plumber in flannel. The man who used to sit across from city council members and stare them down on contract terms. He was still in there. The ceremony was at 1 o'clock at Hartfield University, on a grass quad in front of an old stone building that looked like a bank. I parked a Silverado in a faculty lot a half-mile away because I didn't want Beckett to see it on his way in. I walked. Hollis was already there, in a navy suit, leaning against an oak tree, with the envelope under his arm. Janine was with him. Beckett walked across the stage at 1:43 p.m. I could see him from my place in the back row of folding chairs, where I'd sat down quietly while the dean was speaking. Beckett looked tan. He'd gotten his hair cut. Ainsley was 3 rows up, in a yellow dress, filming him with her phone. The walls of his future, his words, were rising around him. He didn't see me. He saw me 10 minutes later when the ceremony was over and the families were streaming onto the lawn for photographs. I stood up. I walked toward him. He was laughing at something Ainsley had said. He looked over her shoulder and his eyes met mine, and the laugh died on his face like a candle in a draft. Pop, he said, what are you doing here? I didn't answer. I just stood there in the suit holding the envelope Hollis had handed me. Ainsley turned to look at me. Her eyes did that thing rich kids' eyes do, where they scan for the price tag of your shoes. She didn't find what she expected. The shoes were Allen Edmonds. They cost $800. Beckett, I said, I came to give you your graduation gift. He smiled. A tight, panicked smile. Pop, this isn't really the time. We can do this tomorrow. Let me introduce you to Ainsley's parents. This is the time, I said. I handed him the envelope. He didn't open it right away. He held it, and his hand started to shake. The way a hand shakes when the brain has finally figured out what the body has been trying to say. Behind him, Ainsley's parents were approaching. The father was a man with a tan from Sonoma and capped teeth. The mother was wearing a hat. They were already arranging their faces for the introduction Beckett had promised them. Open it, I said. He opened it. He read the first page, the accounting, $341,000 itemized. His face went the color of skim milk. He flipped to the second page, the trust revocation. He flipped to the third, the forged mortgage application, the highlighted signature, his own name typed at the bottom of the affidavit. He looked up at me. His mouth was open. He looked like a fish that has just discovered the air. Ainsley's father stepped forward, sensing something was off, doing what men like that do, which is intervene. "Beckett, son, is everything all right? Should we step away?" I turned to him. I put out my hand. "Wendell Pruitt," I said. "I'm Beckett's grandfather, the one he didn't tell you existed." He shook my hand on reflex. He didn't know what else to do. I turned back to Beckett. The lawn around us had quieted in that way crowds quiet when they sense a wreck happening, but don't yet know what the wreckage will look like. Phones were starting to come up. "You told me Wednesday," I said, and I kept my voice low because I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to tell the truth, that having me at this ceremony would set you back socially. So I want you to know, in front of the people whose opinion you valued more than mine, exactly what you set yourself back from. I started counting. I didn't yell. I spoke the way a man speaks when he's reading a contract aloud. The Honda Civic in the parking lot is titled in my name. It's going home with me tonight on a flatbed. The condo in Lincoln Park, you don't have a down payment for it because the wire transfer was canceled Wednesday afternoon. The mortgage you were going to sign for on Tuesday, the bank has been notified that the co-signer's signature is forged. The credit card in your wallet was canceled at 9 a.m. Wednesday. The joint account is frozen. The trust I'd set up for you, the one I was going to roll over to you next year on your 23rd birthday, has been redirected to the Renata Pruitt Memorial Trade Scholarship that's named after your mother. You haven't mentioned her in 3 years. Ainsley took a step back, just a small one. But I saw it. As of this moment, Beckett, you owe me nothing financially. Because I'm not going to pursue the forgery. Because your mother would not want me to. But you owe yourself a long look in the mirror. Because the man you decided to be ashamed of is the only reason you ever had a roof, a meal, or a chance. And the $85,000 condo? You're going to have to tell Ainsley yourself. I put my hand on his shoulder. Just for a second. Long enough for him to feel it. I loved your mother more than anything in this world, I said. And I tried to love you the same way. I'm not stopping, Beckett. But I am stepping back, because what you needed from me was money, and what I needed from you was your respect. And only one of us was being honest about that. I let go of his shoulder. Congratulations on your graduation, son. I turned around and walked back across the lawn the way I came. Hollis fell in beside me at the oak tree. Janine was already on the phone with the towing company about the Honda. Behind us, I could hear Ainsley's voice rising, asking what condo. What was he talking about? What does he mean canceled? I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. We got to my truck. Hollis opened the passenger door. "You all right, Wendell?" I sat in the driver's seat and put both hands on the wheel and looked out at the parking lot. A red-winged blackbird was sitting on a chain-link fence calling to its mate. "I'm all right, Hollis. I think I might actually be all right." I drove home. I changed out of the suit. I hung it back up in the closet, and the same dry cleaner's plastic it had been in for 12 years. I put on my Carhartt and my work pants, and I went out to the garage, and I started cleaning out the boxes of Beckett's things that he'd been storing there since high school. Old yearbooks, a lacrosse stick, a box of trophies from when I'd taken him to Pinewood Derby races back in Cub Scouts. I sorted them gently. I wasn't throwing them away. I was putting them in storage, because if there was ever going to be a road back, those things would still be his to claim. I just wasn't going to be the one carrying them anymore. The phone call started that night. Beckett left 6 voicemails. The first 3 were furious. The next 2 were panicked. The last one, at 2 in the morning, was quiet. Just his voice saying, "Pop, I don't know what I'm supposed to do." I listened to it twice. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Not for a long time. 6 months later, I got a card in the mail. A real card, in an envelope with a handwritten note inside. He was working as a shift manager at a sporting goods store in Toledo. Ainsley had broken up with him a week after graduation when she found out about the condo. He'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with a roommate. He was paying down some debt. He didn't ask for money. He just said he'd been thinking about his mother a lot. He said he'd been thinking about me. He said when he was ready, if I was ready, he'd like to come over and help me clean out the garage for real this time. I kept the card on the kitchen counter for 2 weeks before I wrote back. I told him the garage could wait. I told him if he wanted to come for Sunday dinner sometime, he could. I told him I'd make pot roast. He came in March. He showed up in a used Ford Focus with a dent in the back bumper. He was thinner. He'd gotten a job at a community college helping kids fill out FAFSA forms in the financial aid office. He liked it. He stayed for 3 hours. We didn't talk about Hartfield. We didn't talk about the lawn or the envelope or his mother. We talked about the Indians. We talked about the carburetor on the Silverado which was acting up. He helped me fix it. He had grease on his hands when he left. I noticed that. Before he got in his car, he turned around and stood in the driveway and said, "Pop, I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it right, but I'm sorry." I told him I knew. I told him the only way to make a thing right is to live different, starting now. I told him I loved him. He drove away. The brake lights flickered at the end of the street. I stood in the driveway for a long time after he was gone, and I thought about Renata, and I thought about the man I'd been at 22, and I thought about the long, slow work of becoming somebody worth being. I went back inside. I put the dishes in the sink. The sun was going down behind the maple tree in the backyard, and the kitchen got that orange light it gets in the evening. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I sat down at the table. I was 73 years old. I had $46 million in the bank, a paid-off house, a Silverado that started on the first try most mornings, and a grandson who was learning, finally, the only lesson I'd ever really wanted to teach him, which is that you don't get the things you haven't earned, and the people who love you aren't the ones who tell you you're already perfect. They're the ones who tell you the truth, and then sit at the table and wait for you to come home. I drank my coffee. I let it get cold while I sat there. Outside, somewhere down the street, a kid was learning to ride a bike. I could hear the father running alongside, calling out, I've got you, you're doing it." I sat in the orange light of my kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't tired. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after the sun went down. Long enough for the coffee in my cup to lose its warmth, long enough for the orange light through the maple tree to fade into a soft gray. I thought about everything that had brought me to that moment. The years of quiet sacrifice, the Wednesday in the kitchen, the lawn at Hartfield, the drive home with an empty passenger seat where Beckett used to ride. I'm 73 years old, and if there's one thing I've come to understand, it's that nothing in this life happens by accident. Not the good, not the bad. Beckett didn't wake up one morning a stranger to me. He became a stranger one small choice at a time, and so did I, by letting it happen. Every check I wrote without a conversation. Every excuse I made for behavior that needed correcting, not coddling. Every time I told myself he was just young, just nervous, just trying to fit in. I was building the very monster I would later have to face down on a graduation lawn in front of strangers. The harvest a man reaps is always the seed he planted, even when he planted it with love. But here is what I've also learned. A person is never finished becoming who they are going to be. Not at 22, not at 73. The day Beckett told me I would embarrass him, he wasn't a bad person. He was a soft person. Softness in a young man is what happens when nothing has ever been required of him. And I had the chance, for 14 years, to require something, and I didn't. So when I finally did, on that Saturday in May, what I gave him wasn't punishment. It was the first real demand I had ever made of him, the demand to look at the truth of his own life and decide what kind of man he wanted to be inside of it. Character is not something you are born with. It is something you build the way I used to build a foundation. One bag of concrete at a time, in the cold, when nobody is watching. Honesty is a habit. Gratitude is a habit. Hard work is a habit. And when a young person grows up without those habits, the kindest thing an older person can do, the truest act of love, is to stop subsidizing the absence of them. I think about Beckett driving away in his dented Ford Focus with grease on his hands, and I think he might just make it. Not because of what I gave him, because of what I finally stopped giving him. The respect I'd been withholding all those years was the respect of treating him like a man who could handle the consequences of his own decisions. The day I finally extended that respect was the day he had a chance to become one. If you are blessed with the strength to tell the people you love the hard truth, do it while you still have time. Love without honesty is just a check with no signature. It looks like something. It doesn't cash.